Hi, I am Dr. Felice Gersh, your integrative OBGYN physician, and I want to talk to you a bit about peptides. I cannot tell you how many times a day patients come in and start asking me about peptides, so I figure it's about time we spoke about it together. Well, first of all, what are peptides? Have you heard about them? They're getting a lot of traction now. They're very trendy. Many celebrities are talking about them, wellness influencers, and others. And many clinics are starting to promote, or they have been promoting them and giving them to many patients. And they're giving them in ways that I am very concerned about. So I want to talk to you about this trend and my opinion about it. Well, number one, back to what are peptides? Peptides are chains of amino acids. I know you've heard of amino acids. They are the building blocks of peptides and proteins. Well, what's the difference between peptides and proteins? Well, it's kind of vague. It's sort of in the number of amino acids. So a peptide is an amino acid that has anywhere from 2 to 100 peptides lined up in a chain. Now, what do peptides do? And well, they do a million things. That's the thing. Peptides are one of the most important, probably the most important signaling system in our bodies. Did you ever wonder how cells know what to do and how they respond and what's happening? Well, they act because they're told what to do, and the tellers, the signaling agents, are called peptides. So what are we talking about? Like everything. So peptides tell the cells what to make in terms of proteins, enzymes, hormones. They also are very important for production. Well, I mentioned, proteins like collagen, cartilage, healing, making new tissues, wound healing, growing muscle, growing bone. They're very, very key to doing all those things. They're very important in attacking and dealing with pathogens, invading bacteria and viruses. So there are antimicrobial peptides. They're involved in dealing with inflammation, repair, fighting off pathogens, creating enzyme systems, so many things in the body. Now, how many peptides are there? Well, thousands of peptides. There are at least 7,000 identified peptides, and probably because peptides can actually interact with each other and other proteins to recombine and make little different structures and different chains. It could be well over 20,000 when you add in all of that. So it's really complex. Now, let me name a couple of peptides. I'm not going to go into lots of specifics of different peptides, but some that you may have heard of. Well, one of the most famous peptides is called insulin. So insulin was the first created peptide that matched a known one, okay? Before we had the creation of insulin for type 1 diabetics, they had to use insulin from rabbits. That didn't work out too well. This was in the 1920s, so we're talking about 100 years ago. So we've known about peptides for a very long time. There's been research on peptides for well over 100 years. So this isn't like, oh my gosh, a brand new discovery. And there's many pharmaceutical companies carrying on research right now, probably as you're hearing this, looking at new ways to use peptides as pharmaceuticals to deal with specific medical issues. So I want to say right out the gate that I think there's a tremendous potential for the isolation, creation, and utilization of peptides in medicine. So I'm not anti-peptide. I'm very pro-peptide. I just am anti what's going on now in the use of peptides, and I'll tell you why, of course. Well, I mentioned insulin as probably the most famous peptide. Here's another pretty famous peptide, oxytocin. Now, oxytocin, as you probably have heard, is about bonding and love. Well, it's also about having sexual response and having orgasms. In pregnancy, it's about the instigation of contractions. You probably heard of Pitocin to induce or augment a labor for someone who's about to have a baby. Well, Pitocin is a synthetic form of oxytocin. And what about having breast milk and nursing? Oxytocin is very involved in that as well. And after a woman gives birth, we give some Pitocin, the synthetic version, to help contract down the uterus to try to slow any blood loss postpartum. So we have been using that for a very long time. When I was just a medical student, I used that peptide all the time in obstetrical practice. Now, as I deal with estrogen all the time, I learned a lot about the role of estradiol and its relationship to oxytocin. Without adequate estradiol, the peptide oxytocin will not be manufactured properly and its receptors won't work properly. So that's just like the beginning of understanding that there's a very strong relationship between estradiol and peptides. I just mentioned oxytocin. Well, it turns out that many peptides how are they triggered to be produced? Peptides are made through the nucleus of a cell that creates the protein, all the proteins that the cells make, and the peptides that the cell make. So you've probably heard of DNA and RNA. We won't go into all the ins and outs of it, but you need to have the function of the nucleus of the cell involving DNA, and then on the ribosome, which is where the actual production of these amino acid chains, whether they're proteins or peptides, that's where they're produced. And what triggers the cell to make these peptides? Well, in many cases, it's actually hormones. Hormones are the drivers of the production of many peptides. Now, every time I've heard about another peptide, and remember, there are known 7,000, not counting the rearrangements, which is probably over 20,000, or even infinite numbers. But in terms of the 7,000 basic peptides that we know, every time I learn about a new peptide, I go look it up. And not all, but a very high percentage are managed or modulated in their production by estradiol. And I'll come back to tell you why I think that's really important. And nutrients. So when you have insufficient or too many nutrients of some kind, a nutrient can signal a cell to make a peptide. Inflammation can trigger a cell to make a peptide. And so there are a variety of signals. Injury, which can be part of inflammation, can signal a cell to make a peptide. Peptides can signal a cell to make more peptides or make a different peptide. It's really, really complex. And peptides can sometimes signal cells to make even hormones. So it's like a really back and forth, kind of a cyclic thing, how all these things can interact. So I mentioned some of the famous peptides, insulin and oxytocin. Well, some of the peptides that come out of the pituitary gland you may have heard of. Adrenocorticotropin hormone, ACTH, that triggers the production of cortisol and also the androgen from the adrenal, the HAS. But it's famous particularly for cortisol triggering. And we have antidiuretic hormone, ADH. That is another peptide. So there are just so many different peptides. And so, as you can see, a peptide can signal a hormone to be produced, and a hormone can trigger a peptide to be produced. In the brain, one of the famous peptides that is also being researched as a pharmaceutical are the Kisspeptins. So when a woman is going to ovulate, she produces Kisspeptins from one area of the hypothalamus, which triggers another area of the hypothalamus to produce releasing factors that then go to the pituitary gland to have the pituitary gland produce the proteins luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, and they're considered hormones, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, to then travel in the blood to the ovaries to then produce testosterone and estradiol. So you can see it's all complex. And what triggers the hypothalamus to make the Kisspeptins? Well, it can be nutrients. I mentioned nutrients can trigger the production of peptides. And if you don't have enough nutrients, like in a woman who has anorexia, or she's malabsorbing and she has malnutrition or starvation, then that will not trigger the production of peptides, and they get what's called hypothalamic amenorrhea, because the hypothalamus isn't creating the triggers to produce the pituitary hormones to then trigger the production of estradiol and testosterone from the ovaries. So that's why it's so important that women have adequate nutrition to be fertile and have regular cycles. So peptides are involved in everything, like you name it. And there are so many. So what's happening in different clinics? Well, many clinics are using peptides. Now, is that okay? Well, I don't think it is. Most peptides that are used in the health clinics are injectables. Now, why is it that peptides are not typically very useful if taken orally? Now, some peptides are sold by supplement companies and other kind of nutrition companies orally. Well, I wouldn't say that they're dangerous at all, but they're not useful at all either, because they're little chains, 2 to 100 amino acids in a line, and when you swallow them, where do they go? They go down the esophagus into the stomach and through the digestive tract. And what does the digestive tract do to proteins? Well, remember, peptides are like little shortened proteins. They're shorter than the long chain amino acids that would be called proteins. That would be more than 100 of these amino acids lined up. Well, it doesn't matter if it's a peptide or it's a protein. They're all similar. They're chains of amino acids. Our stomach and our digestive tract, what does it do? It breaks them down back into amino acids, because that's the whole purpose of digestion. If you swallow protein, it breaks it down into amino acids so that you can absorb the amino acids, and then our bodies, create the specific peptides and proteins that we need from consuming the proteins and peptides that are coming from an animal or a plant source. So when you swallow a peptide that you may have paid a lot of money for, you're just getting a chain of amino acids that's going to be broken down into amino acids. So what's the use of that? You might as well have some beans or a steak or a piece of chicken, because they're all going to break down into their component amino acids. Now, what about topical peptides? There are many, cosmetic products, aesthetic products. Well, they may have some use. I'm not going to say there could be no use to topical peptides, but who knows who's making them, what's in them? Is it really the right thing? Is it the wrong thing? Are they going to last? Many peptides are very fragile and they'll just fall apart. Okay, so what you put on your face or on your hair may not really last as a peptide. It might not. Remember, these are not under great scrutiny. So, you pay your money, you take your chances, but they're not likely to hurt you. That's a real important takeaway. Now, there is the potential that if you put peptides that are in cosmetic, lotions or other kinds of serums, or you put it on your hair, that they might help to rejuvenate. They might, because we know that peptides, among their many, many functions, which is controlling virtually everything in the cell, peptides tell cells what to do. They might improve healing. There's some evidence for wound clinics to use topical peptides. So I think that it's a bright potential future, but they have to be produced under really strict, controls. You have to know what you're getting. And, it's a kind of a free-for-all in the aesthetic world. So, we hope that you're getting what you think you're getting. And you may just end up with placebo effect, but they're not likely to harm you. Well, what about the injectables? Well, let's talk about the pharmaceuticals that are injectables. Like, well, insulin. Have you ever heard anyone swallowing insulin? No, you do not swallow insulin. Insulin has to either be injected or as a pump. It has to be like an infusion. You don't you don't swallow insulin. That will not happen. It's just not going to work. Now, another type of a peptide, that sometimes, people would use, um, can come as a form of a shot, and other peptides, people don't use as a shot. But the most famous shot peptide, you know what I'm talking about? GLP-1s. Now, I mentioned that some of them are not shots. So they're working on how to have some oral GLP-1s, glucagon-like peptide 1, the famous type of peptide that is being used all over the world now to facilitate insulin sensitivity when used in a smaller dose for diabetics. And those peptides have been around for over 20 years. The first one that came out on the market, I remember it well, the brand name was Byetta. And that had to be injected every single day, which made it kind of a pain for a lot of people to deal with. And then they modified it so now we have peptide shots of GLP-1 that only have to be injected once a week. There are also some oral ones. They don't work as well. They don't really last and get into the bloodstream well. But there's research trying to modify them so they can be taken orally. So we do have the famous insulin as a peptide, as an injectable. Most GLP-1s are injectables because that's how they work by far the best. And what about in different other clinics where they're using the injectable peptides? That's what most of them are because, like I said, orally they tend to be digested, okay? And then they just break down into their component amino acids. So there are over 7,000 of these peptides, and quite a few, like over 100, have been able to be identified and synthesized. And the problem is who's manufacturing them and where's the data to support using them in humans? There's only, well, maybe 100 peptides have been worked with in humans, remember, out of 7,000. And there's a few of them that have become pharmaceuticals, many more that are under study right now. They're being looked at. But we need to wait. In my opinion, we need to wait for adequate human studies, and when they're produced, that these peptides are produced under very, very strict controls in terms of their purity and their content and their lasting longevity properties. What's happening now in many, many places, and this is a problem, these are not FDA approved peptides. Only a few are FDA approved. So this is being done sort of like the wild, wild west. They're not FDA approved. Very little data right now is done, available in human studies. And a lot of promising data is available in rodent studies, but you don't know how to dose from a rodent to a human. And honestly, that's preclinical data. You really don't want to inject something in your body where the only data you have that's reliable is from a rat study. And we don't know what to do about combining. Many of the clinics are combining multiple peptides. I've had patients come in who went to a clinic where there are hundreds of dollars per peptide shot, and they're getting these peptides, like 5 to 7 peptides at a time. Talk about lack of data. There's little enough data on getting one peptide at a time, let alone multiple peptides injected into your body. And you can't even be sure of the purity or the content of what is being injected because these are not being made under strict guidance. These are being made in compounding pharmacies. So technically, injecting anything into your body like that is not FDA approved is technically not even legal. And the FDA has come down heavily on some of the peptides, the use of these peptides. That may change because our current system with the Kennedy, who's in charge, is very enamored by peptides, apparently, and may release all of these peptides from any kind of regulatory status. That doesn't make them immediately safe, even if they take them off of their status now and make them all available with no further studies, no human data, and suddenly they're all available. And that is why I want to warn you, don't do it. Unless they have safety guidance, safety data, they're manufactured in a facility where there actually is some kind of oversight. I would never want my patients or myself or family members to just get an injection of something and you can't even be totally sure what it is. And so I'm not saying that I don't trust and really admire many compounding pharmacies, but to have an injectable into your body is really a big leap of faith, and I wouldn't do it. But even if I knew what it was, how do I know that it's safe? What is the right dose? And here's another very interesting thing about peptides. They are not at the same level in the same body in different places at the same time. Well, let's just go back to oxytocin. So I've done a lot of research on oxytocin because it relates to my field of expertise, female health. So in the brain, when a woman has oxytocin produced, like when she has sexual excitement, she'll have a totally different amount of oxytocin in different parts of her brain, and then a totally different amount in her body peripherally. So here's like a really big question. If you take a peptide and just inject it, where's it going? What's it doing for the next week or few days? What's happening to that peptide? It turns out peptides are very specific in what they're doing in what part of the body at any one time. So you could have a high amount of one peptide in the brain, and that same peptide is very low in the GI tract and then very high in the bones at the same time. So what the heck are we doing if we're giving a peptide and it naturally, when the body makes it naturally, we have all different levels in the same organ and all over the body at the same time. So how are we dosing this to make any sense with no data? What is the harm? What are the side effects? What are the potential long-term consequences? We don't know. So this is not ready for prime time. I want to reiterate, I know peptides do amazing things in the body because everything in the body that happens is amazing. And how do they happen? They happen because peptides are giving the cells instructions to do all these things. But it's in the thousands and they're all over the place. And we don't even have all of these thousands available for injections. And what does it really come down to? Micromanagement. You're trying to micromanage how every cell is doing whatever it's going to do all at the same time by just injecting these random peptides that, when you have other thousands of peptides that you're not injecting and you're giving them to people in random combinations with no long-term or even short-term data. This is not what I call the scientific method of providing healthcare. So that is just really scary and dangerous to me. I think the potential is incredible for certain medical issues that we can have an isolated peptide for a specific person, for a specific problem to be used for a specific amount of time, and understanding what are the potential side effects and consequences in other organs of the body when these peptides are injected. The nice thing about peptides is because they're natural, assuming that the one that is injected is natural, is that when the body breaks them down, they just break down into amino acids, right? So they're not weird chemicals that never exist in a human body or anywhere else on the planet except in a laboratory that's made by a pharmaceutical company. No, these are like natural products, so that's good. But what do I recommend? Until we have more safety data, until we have more experience and we know how to dose them, how to use them, what their side effects are, and everything that has to do with them. They are just potentials. I think they're potentially very useful, but they're not ready for prime time. And right now they're unregulated. We don't know what we're injecting or what we're doing when we give them. And some of them, like, for example, there are secretagogues for growth hormone. And people say, oh, I love growth hormone. Well, growth hormone isn't produced 24/7. Growth hormone it's produced during the night, not during the day. And you can trigger your own production of growth hormone if you do fasting and then you refeed. That triggers the production of growth hormone. What else triggers the production of growth hormone? Estradiol triggers the production of growth hormone. But we don't want growth hormone just to be coming at random times of the day or for continuous growth hormone. There's some question that can induce, for example, diabetes. You can have too high of blood sugar, and there's a potential that it can induce cancers because of growth, that it's like unrelenting growth triggering. We want to have growth hormone. Of course we want growth hormone, but we want to have it in a physiologic, natural way. So I mentioned that estradiol is the trigger to many different peptides, but there are many triggers. It's not just that. So what is my goal for now? Until we have better data and we know what we're doing with peptides, all thousands of them, I am recommending macro management. Micromanagement, where you're going to have all these thousands of peptides and somehow you're going to figure out what cell needs what peptide when, in what part of the body at any one time. Come on, we cannot micromanage every cell in the body to do something at the right time in the right way. So I'm into macro management. What does that mean? Well, it means that you try to get the proper physiologic levels of hormones. You try to get them in the rhythms and the ways that the body would naturally produce them. Remember, hormones are a major trigger to the production of peptides, and let the body micromanage itself. What else is a trigger to peptides? Well, nutrients. So get the nutrients right. Make sure you eat the right foods at the right times. That will help your body to make the thousands of peptides that it needs to have to do all the functions that the body needs to do the right way. So eat the right food. What else can trigger peptides or not get peptides at the right time? If you have too much stress, if you have inflammation, if you have inadequate sleep, all of these things can interfere with the proper production of peptides. So you want to eat the right foods, you want to get the right sleep, you want to have fitness, you want to control inflammation, you want to do all those things, get the right balance of hormones. And guess what? Your body, which knows it's genetically programmed to make the right peptide in the right place, in the right amount, at the right time, it will make them. I am sure that over the next decade, we're going to see more and more pharmaceutical peptides coming out, but they're not going to come out, I hope, for just randomness to just use them. No, they'll be for a specific medical condition that someone is undergoing, that they're ill with something in particular. But for general health, for wellness, do not do peptides. Please don't. You don't know what you're getting. Encourage your body to be macromanaged by getting all the lifestyle things right and getting the hormones right, and then let your body do what it's designed to do, to make those thousands of peptides that are at all different levels, at all different times, in all different parts of the body, and you can't micromanage that. We can't. I can't. I understand wanting the magic bullet all the time to make you grow beautiful muscles, to make you feel fabulous, to get the greatest sleep, to reduce inflammation, to look super young, to be gorgeous, to have the best hair in town. But we can't do this by just taking shots of peptides, loads of shots of peptides and, breaking the bank. We're not ready for that. Maybe that day will come. We'll get the peptides of the week, and then, wonderful things will happen. In the meantime, until that fantastical fantasy day arrives, for now, focus on macro management, do the lifestyle things, and work on having optimal hormones. For menopausal women, having optimal estradiol and progesterone will help to get you the right peptides at the right time, including GLP-1, which we're supposed to make ourselves, but we've messed up so many things that many people are not making enough GLP-1. Our bodies are designed to make these peptides. Do what you can to get your body to make the peptides at the right time, in the right cells, in the right part of the organs, and stop trying to micromanage and just focus on what we can control and leave the peptides to the researchers, and not now, not yet, not ready for prime time. Please don't get injectables with what you don't know and what no one knows for sure, and especially in combinations where there's no data of safety whatsoever.